Mate, I see you have a fair income interest in the most useful of Aussie traditions. That is, mate, the tradition of the shout. Shout is a fine Aussie word, mate, and it goes back linguistically at least 130 years, and culturally longer than that. Let's see the little bugger in use. What are you drinking, mate? My shout.
Oh, just a water, mate. I'm as pissed as a fart.
Oh, come on, mate.
No, mate. I'm as full as a goog.
Mate.
Sorry, mate. I'm as pissed as a newt.
Mate, don't park on me.
Mate, I'm absolutely paralytic.
Oh, you bloody piker.
Mate, I told you, I'm blotto. Off me tree. Absolutely muted.
Oh, mate, what's bloody wrong with you? You're sounding like a bloody person who doesn't have a drink with his mate.
Well, mate, if you put it like that, I can't let a mate down now, I suppose.
Oh, good on you, champ. That's the Anzac spirit shining through all right. Mate, you can bloody well listen to me. This is the last time I'm shouting you beers, you bludging bastard.
Mate, I was so hungry I could have eaten the crotch out of a low-flying duck.
Mate, look, I'm sure you bloody well could have. And you want to know why? Because you're a bloody disgrace, mate. That's right. You're lying there, by the barbie, in that bloody pool device, drinking my grog, eating my tucker, like bloody Lady Muck, mate. That's what you're like. Bloody Lady Muck. Wouldn't shout if a shark bit you. Bludge off me till you're red in the face. And I'm just bloody sick of it, right? Bloody sick of it. So, mate, next time we have a barbie, any RV, it's your shout. Okay, mate? It's your shout. The bludging stops here.
Brucey, me old China, good to hear from you. Haven't heard from you since the Barbie, that RV. Thanks again for that, mate. I'll shout you a few pig's ears next time we're down at the old rubbity.
Bloody oath you will. Anyway, mate, that's all forgotten. But I'm bloody dying here, mate. How bloody hot is it? Come on, mate. You bloody owe me after I shouted you to all that tucker and grog at that bloody bar with the other RV. So what the bloody hell are people on about when they say such things? Mate, if someone shouts you something, they buy something for you. So if someone says, "Time for dinner, my shout kids," then that means they're going to buy their kids some dinner. But is that all it means? If Jono, for example, says to Bruce, just for example, "No, Bruce, my shout," does that mean that Jono's a really good bloke and that he's giving Bruce a beer because he likes him so much? Generally, sadly, the answer to that, mate, is a big, fat no. Mate, isn't it your shout?
No, Bruce. I shouted the last round.
Oh, like bloody hell you did. Mate, you're nothing but a bludger and a piker, and you wouldn't shout if a shark bit you.
Mate, a shark did bite me, and I did shout the last round.
But that doesn't mean that a bloke can't buy another bloke a beer. For example, mate, sometimes a rich bastard will shout the whole bar. So as you might have gathered, mate, I'm here to tell you that most of the time the use of the word shout and the act of shouting isn't that simple. You see, often, mate, that Aussie who amazingly bought everyone in your little group a beer expects something back in return. Specifically, mate, he expects every single person he bought a beer for to buy him a beer back. Not next time you meet, not tomorrow, not next week. He expects a beer right after he finishes the beer that he just bought himself, and so on until every little bastard in the group that he shouted shouts him back in return. Mate, we've heard some fair income horror stories about backpackers who have been in North America or some other place and have shouted a group of the locals a beer, only to have them all smile and marvel at what a wonderful person the Aussie is. Having spent all of his money on the shout, the Aussie's then got no choice but to sit the night out, thirsty, thinking terrible things about every unwitting bludger in the group. And the worst thing about this, mate, is that because it's so strongly ingrained at a cultural level, the poor backpacker's likely to do the same thing next time he buys a beer. He can't help himself. He just goes to the bar and says to the bloke next to him, "Mate, what are you drinking?" See, in the backpacker's mind, it's actually quite rude not to offer the people in his group a drink when he goes to the bar. And it might take months of being burnt before the poor bugger's condition not to offer people a drink. Either that or he's got to train his mates up. One thing pommies have going for them is that they seem to understand this crucial ritual. They use a different vocabulary to describe what's going on, and are more amenable to shouts carrying over from session to session. But generally, those pommies know their rights and they know their obligations in the Australian shouting culture. So how does it work exactly then, mate? How can you comply with these unwritten social rules with respect to shouting? The basic rule is, of course, mate, and listen very carefully, is if someone buys you a drink, even if they don't use the word shout, you should buy them a drink in return when they've finished theirs. They might say they don't want the drink, but buy it from them anyway, unless they're driving somewhere. If you really want to impress, mate, then make sure that you're the first to shout. Don't wait for them to shout, just go to the bar and say, "Mate, what are you after?" And when he says, "Oh, I'll get him," you say, "No, mate, it's my shout." Mate, but of course things get a bit more complex when there's more than one person shouting. For example, in a group situation. Very complex indeed. If you're in luck, mate, the shout will be proceeding around the group in one defined direction. When it's your turn, you'll have to shout everyone in the group. Of course, mate, once you've done that, which may be quite expensive, then you'll have lots of shouts coming your way. That is, you can culturally expect that every bastard you bought a drink for will buy you one in return. If they don't, then you've a right to be snaky, or dirty, or very annoyed. Where it gets really confusing, mate, and this is not something I'd recommend, is where you get into multiple shouts in the one time. One bloke buys you a drink, you accept it, and then another bloke walks up with a drink and you take that. Straight away you've got double obligations, mate. And my advice to you as a novice would be to exit one of the shouts as quickly as possible. And that of course leads us to possibly the most prickly problem faced by novice shouters. When can you leave the shout? Strictly, you can only leave the shout if you don't disadvantage anyone participating in the shout. That is, you don't owe anyone around. The way, of course, to do this is to leave immediately after your shout. Preferably when you're even Stevens, but also if you've just shouted at everyone and they owe you a shout. If you do that, mate, then you run the very real risk of being considered a good bloke, which is a good thing, mate. The absolute worst thing you can do, mate, in a shouting situation is to leave with beers still outstanding. I can't emphasise that enough, mate. The only exception to this rule is if it's the end of a long, messy evening and no one's really keeping track anymore. But I'd err on the side of caution and at least initially never ever leave a room with shouting obligations outstanding. If you do, mate, then you'll be considered a bludger who bludgers beer off people. They might also call you a tight ass, and they might say things like you wouldn't shout if a shark bit you. Anyway, mate, don't panic too much, it's all a bit of fun, and newcomers will be given some leeway. Remember, mate, next time I see you in a pub, it's your shout.